India's commitment to free speech is under the spotlight, with international monitors saying press freedom is weaker than it was and weaker than it should be. Are they right? I'm The Outsider. This is our motion tonight. Free speech is under serious threat in India. Well, speaking for that motion, N.Ram. Until January, he was editor-in-chief of the Hindu newspaper and remains a director of it. And with him, journalist and online interviewer Madhu Trehan, founder of the News Laundry website. Speaking against the motion, Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament for the Congress Party and former Under-Secretary General at the United Nations. And with him, Anil Daka, who's worn many different hats, an engineer, film and TV critic, TV producer and newspaper editor, as well as a film censor. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our panel. So could I please ask N.Ram to speak first for the motion?
Thank you. Free speech is under serious threat in India, and it's a growing threat, a widening threat, a steadily escalating threat. Let me enter three qualifications at the start. One, there's no need to exaggerate because there are spaces, considerable spaces in the system for free speech. No need for the sake of our proposition to believe in the absolutism of the right to free speech because nobody really does. And third, we can take heart from the spirited defense of free speech from various voices, various quarters, including from time to time the higher courts. But only someone burying his or her head in the sand or losing it in the clouds will deny that the threat is live, present, and serious. The problem, I think, goes back to our Constitution. Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and expression as a fundamental right. This right, hard won in the freedom struggle against a highly repressive British Raj, is unamendable. This is because it's part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court of India. But then free speech is hemmed in and to a significant extent, I believe, undone by Article 19(2). It provides for restrictions on this fundamental right by law, sometimes reasonable restrictions, some not. Notable among the unreasonable restrictions seemingly allowed by the Constitution are the law of criminal defamation, the undefined power of contempt of court, uncodified legislative privilege, the outrageous law of sedition, that is Section 124(a) of the Indian Penal Code. And Nehru, in a parliamentary debate Jawaharlal Nehru in 1951, said this 124(a) is highly obnoxious, and the sooner we get rid of it, the better.
Can I ask you to come to a close, please?
Yes, today the threat is of a much higher order because there's serious violence and a shocking acquiescence by the state in these indication and acts of intolerance. See what happened to M.F. Hussain. We were the first country to ban the satanic verses and so forth.
All right. N.Ram, thank you very much indeed. You were a newspaper editor for many years, big newspaper, The Hindu. You ever leaned on?
Yes, indeed we were.
And you buckled, did you?
No, we didn't.
You never did? So you managed to practice free speech as an editor in this country?
But there's a chilling effect, a long-term chilling
effect.
You,
not on you, seemingly.
I think you think it's not on you, but there is. It chills under the skin.
What was the chilling effect on you? Did you self-censor after a while?
You thought a bit about what to publish, how to publish, whether you name somebody or not, although I was pretty clear that the law would permit it because the reporter or sometimes I may be summoned to court, and as they say, the lawyers, the process is a punishment.
But in all those years that you were editor of The Hindu, you never buckled once?
I don't think I did.
So you practiced free speech?
Against the odds.
Well, it's always against the odds. Everybody always wants to curtail free speech in any country. Did you not expect a battle?
I'm proud that we went through the battle, but it's not a very liberal environment.
How easy did you think it would be to practice free speech?
Yeah, I didn't want anything easy.
You have enormous power. The newspapers in this country have enormous power. You've got, what, 100 million copies of various newspapers sold every day, 70,000 newspapers, 500 broadcasting satellite channels. This is incredible raw power. And yet you say you're being kicked around by the government, suppressed, that there's a real danger to you. It doesn't look like it when you turn on the television, does it? What's not being said?
some of the power is being abused, but not by people like us who believe in accountability and social responsibility and professionalism and ethics of the profession, ethics of journalism and ethics of free speech, if you like.
You believe in those things, and you were able to practice those things all those years?
More or less, yes.
So you're not a standard bearer for your side of the argument, you're a standard bearer for free speech, actually being able to flourish in India.
Yes, much better than, we deserve much better than this, having fought a highly repressive British Raj. We really stood for this. This was part of the freedom struggle, and this is what we are promised by the Constitution, which makes some shining promises, and yet in practice today, we are much worse off than, I believe, in law and in practice than we were in 1947.
N.Ram, thank you very much indeed. Could I now please ask Shashi Tharoor to speak against the motion?
Well, the motion is apparently that free speech is under serious threat in India. The very fact that we are having this discussion, the fact that we're having this debate in front of an audience of citizens from Mumbai is itself a refutation of this preposterous proposition. But then Mr. Ram makes my case for me before I even need to, because he starts off by laying out 3 caveats that essentially sum up the case for why his proposition doesn't stand up. He says, let's not exaggerate. Of course, there's free speech in India. Well, case proven. He says, let's not have absolutism. But then he goes on to question the fact that what we understand in our constitutional system by free speech is sadly perhaps not what the Western world understands. So whereas in the US, for example, you've got the absolute prohibitions of the First Amendment against any infringement on any kind of speech, all speech is protected. In our country, we do have these restrictions, reasonable and unreasonable. I would also disagree with some of those restrictions, but they're there. And the country has still remained safe and free, despite the existence of these prohibitions. And he says we can take heart from the courts, which is certainly an extremely important example, because he himself cited the intolerance shown to the paintings of M.F. Hussain by a bunch of thugs. Well, M.F. Hussain's right to paint as such was upheld by the Delhi High Court in a landmark judgment that has not been challenged. So we do have the court system. But I will add to those 3 arguments against him, which he's helpfully given us, I'll add other arguments as well. One of the important things we need to take heart from is the practice of our democracy. We are a country which has had lots of laws on the books, including these unreasonable restrictions on free speech, but we are sensible not to apply them in the literal spirit in which they might have been applied by a more malicious government. There are, in theory, in the Constitution, these restrictions, but in practice, Mr. Ram can make the case he wants to against this country's free speech. Ms. Trehan can do the same, and we're fine. We talk about it, we argue it, we discuss it.
Could you come to a close, please?
This is a thriving, lively democracy. Yes, there are too many people in our country who find themselves getting too easily offended, and they try and act on the basis of their sense, their prickly sense of intolerance. But we don't have to accept that, and our government certainly doesn't accept it. So I have to say that even if there are individuals or elements of society who may behave like this, India as a whole protects free speech. We all enjoy our freedom of expression, and therefore, in that sense, it's not under serious threat.
Shashi Tharoor, thank you very much indeed. Unless you're a cartoonist who gets charged with sedition, yeah?
When you get released within 48 hours.
Why were you charged in the first place?
Because unfortunately we have a judicial system.
He wasn't alone. He's not alone in being the only journalist charged with sedition.
We have a judicial system which entertains the most frivolous cases. There was an actress who was prosecuted for kissing Prince Charles on the cheek. I have a case pending against me for the last 4 years,
and yet
because I put my hand across my heart.
And yet
the fact is I still have the freedom of expression to talk about it.
And yet Reporters Without Borders talks about a series of moves by various branches of the state that have threatened and undermined freedom of information. Both federal and local authorities keep taking repressive decisions.
Well, they may take sometimes stupid decisions, but they can be challenged in the courts, and they are. They can be written about and debated, as they are.
You're quite happy with the government's recent curbs on the internet. You wrote Mr. Sibal, the telecoms minister. Mr. Sibal's main concern was not with politics, but with scurrilous material about certain religions that could have incited retaliatory violence. That's what you wrote. So you're leaving it up to the mob to decide what can be discussed and what can't be discussed in India.
In an ideal world, in countries where we're not used to having mobs around, you might feel that you can afford to allow outrageous things to be said about certain faiths and so on.
But
We've
you're
seen in our
allowing them
country
to
as
define
recently-
it. You're allowing them
But
to
we've seen
define
as
the space for
recently as
debate.
this summer, Tim, we've seen how people do, unfortunately, get inflamed, and the serious threats to law and order, not
And
to
they,
freedom
you
of
don't
expression.
think they get inflamed because you let them get away with it. You pander to the mob,
No,
don't you?
I wouldn't say that. I would ask you to look at exactly how many people are involved, how the sensibilities of literally hundreds of millions of people can be affected and inflamed, and ask yourself what a responsible government should do to preserve law and order. Having said
Perhaps
that,
in the long run, the most responsible thing a government can do is to protect free speech and have the law decide what are the limits of it, rather than a mob who says, I'm going to have a riot if you print this or if you put this film on.
I think
you
those-
get to the stage
those
where
riots
even
are-
films like the Da Vinci Code got banned here.
in some states.
Some states.
The fact is that those
You approve of
riots
that
are
sort of
still
thing?
punished. Of
You
course I
approve
don't
of that
approve
sort
of
of
it.
thing?
I don't approve of it.
But
I've read and seen
that's
the Da
daily
Vinci
life
Code.
in India, isn't it?
In some parts of India, for some issues, with some sensitive jurisdictions, I'm afraid so. But it doesn't
So
mean
free
I
speech
approve of
isn't
it.
as alive
I'm
and well as you say
Well,
it
I'm
is in
free to
India.
disagree with it and to condemn it, and I have done so.
All right, Shashi Tharoor, thank you very much indeed. Madhu Trehan, would you speak for the motion, please?
This is a wonderful example of the government. The Congress party learned during the emergency that you cannot be ham-handed about suppressing the press. So now this same party does it so cleverly. Did you know that in the IT Act in 2008 was passed without discussion in Parliament, which all the parties agreed, because not only the Congress party, but all the parties do want to control the press. In that act, they have since amended it to also include anyone who causes them annoyance and inconvenience, which pretty much covers everything, which gave them the handle to actually call, for Kapil Sibal to call in Facebook, Google, Yahoo, and they asked for 355 pieces of content to be removed from all those websites. And do you know that out of the 355, 258 were all criticism of the current government. Only 3 were related to pornography. Only 1 was related to national interest. And this was according to the Google Transparency Report. This act was passed when nobody was looking. The press, in fact, was sleeping on this, and they passed it without anyone noticing. Then what happens? They think they can do it again. So a close associate of Rahul Gandhi, Meenakshi Natarajan, then tries to pass a private member bill, which will then regulate the press. And in that, if you cross the lines, you can go to jail for 5 years. You have to pay 5 crores of fine if you cross the line according to their criteria. And also, your news organization can be suspended for 11 months or forever. When the press woke up to that and exposed that bill, they quietly withdrew again. Then what happens? Government-appointed Katju, Markande Katju, Press Council Chairman, then passes a resolution asking the government to, in the same language, that if the press crosses the line, and this time including the electronic media, that they'll have to pay fines. And
thank you.
Next time, I will tell you more that this government is doing without you knowing it to control, and all these people going to...
All right, Madhu Trehan, I have to stop you here. There are some rules here. Everybody else obeyed them. Everybody else obeyed them.
Sorry.
Not in the interest of censorship, but in the interest of fairness.
I obey.
Okay?
I obey.
Okay, thank you very much.
No free speech.
Exactly. The question is not whether governments... The question is not
I
whether...
got carried away, I apologize.
The question is not whether governments fight dirty, it's whether the press can fight back, isn't it?
Yes, and we are fighting back.
And you do fight back, as you said.
We do
the
fight
press
back.
woke up and did something about the particular issue that you were talking about.
We're not always successful.
Well, you don't expect to be.
No, we do
to be
want
a
to
battle. You do, yeah, I know. But you expect it to be in a free society. There's going to be a battle of ideas.
Yes. But
and the press hasn't exactly covered itself in glory in the past anyway, has it?
That doesn't mean that you can censor us. One doesn't have anything to do with the other.
Question of trust, whether people actually trust the press in this country.
That is for the people to decide.
Look at the scandal over paid content that you've had in recent years.
Absolutely,
the Press
I agree.
Council saying in recent years corruption in the Indian media has gone way beyond the corruption of individual journalists.
And censorship will not help that.
So which is the biggest threat?
Because people like me will expose that paid news.
The question is, which is the biggest threat to press freedom in this country? Is it the journalists or is it the government?
Of course the government, the journalists, if they're doing anything that is corrupt, other journalists expose it, which has happened.
But they don't
You
always
wouldn't know-
expose it, do they? I mean, individuals are putting paid content, paid by politicians or paid by
How would
commercial
you
interests,
know
into their newspaper.
How would you know about paid news unless we had exposed it?
Well, the press council did, but then it tried to bury half of the
It
report,
wasn't the press
didn't it?
council. It was a film called Brokering News, sponsored by Public Broadcasting Service, that exposed it in detail.
And in
then
2010, the press council did their own investigation,
the press council
which
just
9 out of 24 members of the press council voted to add as an annex instead of include in the main report.
But that does, if that means that...
What was that if not
that means that
self-censorship
all
by the press?
Then that means that everything that is happening in the government, that they're corrupt, which means every single person is corrupt. You're generalizing from a small group of people who have done corrupt things, and I do acknowledge it, and they should be castigated. I'm not going to defend corrupt journalists.
I'm just saying you're talking about the government as the big threat to press freedom.
Absolutely.
I'm saying maybe the press itself is the big threat.
No, the press has to clean up its act, but censorship...
It's a big act to clean up, isn't
Certainly,
it?
but that does not
There's a
mean
long way
censorship.
down.
That does not mean censorship. One does not have anything to do with the other.
All right. Madhur Trehan, thank you very much indeed. Anil Dhaka, if I could ask you to speak against the motion, please.
Well, you are asking all the questions, but I want to begin by asking you a question, which is that why are we debating this at all? Because freedom of expression is such a given in this country that I find it quite ridiculous that, four grown-up people are sitting here and debating it, and a huge audience is sitting here and listening to us.
Well, some of them are quite respectable, but I'll let you go on.
Thank you.
The only time that freedom of expression was curbed is during the emergency in 1975. But if you remember those times, and some of you might remember those times, I think it was the press which was muzzled, but people talked. And within 2 years, the whole excesses of the emergency, the excesses of the family planning and so on, that spread like wildfire through the country. So that when the elections came around in 1977, Indira Gandhi was defeated very badly. And that was purely due to freedom of expression. Remember, at that time, there was no social media, there was no Twitter, there was nothing. It was just people talking. Since then, drastic changes have happened. We've had social media come in a really big way. Indians, the usage of mobile phones in this country, the pace of increase is higher than China, is the highest in the world. We have the highest number of publications in the world. We have 136 TV news channels, all of which are extremely free. Reference has been made to Kapil Sibal, reference has been made to defamation laws, etc. Now, when Kapil Sibal came up with his ideas, they were debated and shot down by the media in a very, very strong terms. When the defamation law in India is so weak that it is absolutely toothless, unlike many countries in the West. So it may be, as Shashi said, it may be on the books, but it is completely ineffective. I would say that if at all we have too much freedom of the media, that leads to a lot of negativity. It leads to maybe sometimes irresponsible coverage, but it is freedom. And you just have to pick up the newspaper every single morning, see how many exposes
I have to
there are.
ask you to come to a close.
Yes, if you have to hear the news channels any evening and listen to all the exposés happening there. And you know there's freedom of expression.
Okay. All right. Anil Dhaka, I have to stop you there. Thank you very much indeed. No threat, no serious threat to free speech in India. And yet India's ranking in the Global Press Freedom Index just goes into free fall, doesn't it? You're now at 131 out of 179 countries, worse than Liberia, Kyrgyzstan, South Sudan, Albania. Not countries that pride themselves on being the largest democracies in the world, are they?
Well, I would question these findings. So who's looking at this? What are the parameters being used? I would debate that. Because we live in this country, we know how much freedom there is.
Well, you can
I've been
debate
an
it,
editor.
but one of
I
the-
have never had a problem with I was editor of The Independent. I was editor of The Weekly. I've never had a problem.
You can debate it, but the fact is that the number of requests for content removal, particularly of internet service providers, is going up and up. So the government's on a roll. Google's latest transparency report, 49% increase in government demands to remove content from July to December 2011 compared to the previous half year. They're going up and up.
You have to ask what kind of content has to be removed. If the requests come from the government, what kind?
The Bangalore Centre for Internet and Society
we see around the world today the protests against this film made in America. We see the violence it has generated. It is senseless violence, but it is the result of one film. So every government has to deal with problems like this. You can't...
So censor that film? You would have censored that film, would you?
I would certainly have.
Because of the response?
Yes.
So you would have pandered to public demand, or what you perceive to be public demand?
Not
doesn't break any laws, the film, does it?
Not at all. There is something called responsible freedom. Freedom has to have limits. If you get in the world, if you get people making films or writing articles which abuse other people's beliefs and faiths, there's going to be trouble. Why should you encourage abuse?
Isn't the freedom, if freedom means anything at all, the freedom is to upset people as well as please them?
Yes.
Or do you think it's just up to the role of the government to decide what pleases people and what doesn't?
No,
the nanny state. That's what you want, is it?
Let's not be so simplistic. Of course,
it comes down to very simple things.
No, it does not. It does not come down to that at all. It comes from freedoms. Always comes a sense of responsibility, and that is a very, very important thing in any democracy.
All right, Anil Dhaka, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, a question to the audience. What's the biggest threat to press freedom in India, the government or the journalists themselves? Join us in a moment. Welcome back. I'm The Outsider, and our motion tonight, free speech in India is under serious threat. Well, during the break, we asked the audience who they thought represented the biggest threat to press freedom in India, the government or the journalists themselves. The results are in. 81% of you said the government, 19% said the journalists. Shashi Tharoor, do you want to defend the government here?
Yes, certainly, because in fact...
I think they might be expecting it of you.
I mean, hearing Madhu and you cite all these figures about, God knows, was it 200-odd elements removed from the net? Go on the net right now, you'll find 200 million things against the government. There's no question of the government attempting to censor free speech or free expression. The government is assaulted every day. And in fact, what's interesting about the lack of a threat from the government is how trivial are the alleged attempts to remove content when there is so much more content that is not being challenged or sought to be removed.
N.Ram.
Yeah, the basic problem with their argument is we are not saying there's no free speech in India. We're saying it's under threat. And everyone has said threat from the government in the main, predominantly, overwhelmingly. So there's absolutely no question where the threat comes from. And I'm not saying we can't meet the threat either. We've got all bases covered, Shashi and Anil, on this, because there's no way you can win on this.
Anil Dhaka.
Because that's staring you in the face.
Well, we can't win on this if the questions are framed.
You don't think the government has a case to answer? They do.
No, but the question framed was, is the threat from the government or the journalists? What kind of option is that?
Well, you don't seem to like the motion. You don't like the question either. I mean,
No,
I'm actually surprised you're still sitting here in a way. But we are grateful that you are. We are grateful that you are sitting.
Well, you know, I would be with my friend here, Shashi Tharoor.
It's a rather loose motion, Tim.
Okay, Madhu
We need a
Trehan.
news laundry to wash off.
Okay, Madhu Trehan.
Thank you for the plug for News Laundry. This generalization that, oh, there's so much being written against the government is not the issue, Shashi. The issue over here is that after the Assam violence, this is exactly when the government moved in, when they blame the journalists for the violence when 6 months it was brewing and they did nothing. And they used that opportunity to block 300 websites, including the Times of India, 15 Twitter handles, and two of them journalists. These people, and they were questioned. They were questioned to come and answer questions, much like the emergency at the Ministry of Telecommunication. This is not to harass the journalists. This is to send out a message. The reason why Asim Trivedi
What message?
Message that watch out.
Okay,
if you write anything against us, Kanchan Gupta, Shashi Tharoor of headlines today
you made a point.
were warned.
You made a point.
Madhu, every one of the people you're talking about, including the Times of India website, is up and running, and they're saying exactly what they want to say. You made a long thing about Meenakshi Natarajan's private members bill. It wasn't passed.
Because the press woke up to it.
But the fact is, it wasn't
everyone
passed. It wasn't even presented.
It
wasn't even presented in Parliament, Madhu. This is a tempest in a teapot. We have to understand that very seriously. In our country, we have all sorts of opinions contending, including stuff that may actually be foolish on the part of bureaucrats in the government.
All right.
But there are no actions concretely that infringe.
Okay. I'm now going to take this motion that freedom of speech is under serious threat in India and throw it open to you, the audience. And there's a gentleman in the second row. I think you had your hand up first. Yeah.
I think all you people are very powerful people and you're confusing the common man. Mr. Ram says that there's no freedom, the freedom of speech is under threat. Well, the Hindu goes against aggressively against rival newspapers while exercising its free speech. Madam, you said that the free speech is under threat. Well, media houses are the new houses of parliament. You are the ones who decide and mold the public opinions. I think the Congress party might lose 2014 election if you aggressively campaign against it.
Can you come to a question, please?
My question is, aren't you confusing the common people? On the contrary, there are trivial politicians who behave in trivial manner and are very insensitive. There is vandalism, news studios are broken.
So you're saying everybody, you're asking whether everybody is ignoring the interests of the common man.
There is a nexus between media and the political class, and the common man is being fooled. I want a clarification.
Madhu Trehan.
I agree with you. I think there is a nexus in large news organizations who have done this and do it. And I think this is something that other people in the press should question and point out. You're absolutely right in that. The point is that the government...
Just as much as they criticize the government.
Exactly. But the point is that if you are not informed by people like us or other journalists and other news organizations, the government has now quietly working behind the scenes on a panel which is called the India Privacy Law, a new law in which if a politician decides that if somebody is investigating him, it is crossing it'll be an invasion of his privacy, that person can be thrown in jail with a 5 crore fine and 5 years in jail. Now,
I want to have that
that will stop us from doing any investigation.
Okay, Shashi
and the
Tharoor,
point is, you can't paint it all with one large brush.
Madhu
There are
Trehan,
news organizations...
we can't just have you.
Sorry.
On the program.
Why not?
We need to hear from someone.
Well, I mean,
Shashi Tharoor, do you want to answer that?
Yes, Madhu talks about bills that haven't been introduced, laws that haven't been passed. I haven't seen this draft yet, and believe me, we would like to look at such a law because there are infringements of privacy. Every democracy has a Privacy Act or a privacy law, and it's high time we did too. We're catching up with the democratic world. We're not threatening it.
And what about the common man who feels squeezed by our questioner?
Well, look, I mean, this is...
Between big press barons and politicians.
I'm a member of a party that stands up for the common man, the Aam Aadmi. And the fact is that as far as the Aam Aadmi is concerned, we have now brought in a Right to Information Act, which allows ordinary people to ask any information about how their tax rupees are being spent by the government. That's an example of the common man benefiting from an openness of freedom of expression.
And trivial behavior of the political class?
No, there are elements of politicians who, frankly, I'm ashamed of and you should be ashamed of. But there are also fine people who are upstanding and are holding up the principles on which this country was built.
N.Ram.
Yes, I agree with you that people's issues are not adequately reflected or highlighted by the mainstream media. And that itself is a violation, if you like, of free speech and other rights. And we've got to do something about it. But
you were editor-in-chief of The Hindu for many years.
We published many articles, in particular by P. Sainath, who explored rural distress in a way that few print media journalists anywhere in the world have done. Farmers' suicides, rural extreme distress, and so on. And that's just one example. And the Indian language press has also done that in considerable measure. But the mainstream, I agree with you, does not adequately reflect those voices, those basic needs, and those aspirations.
Okay, Anil Darkar.
Yeah, well, I don't agree with you because I think the mainstream media, especially the press, addresses the needs of common man every single day. If you look at the city pages, there's so many things devoted to the problems of either commuters or the potholes and all kinds of problems constantly being addressed, campaigns being carried out. And these campaigns are being carried out on behalf of whom?
Okay, I'm going to take a question from the gentleman in the second row there. Yes, you.
My question is to Mr. Dharkar and Mr. Shashi Tharoor. They said that there are some laws on the books which are on the book but ineffective. A, if you're the government, and then why aren't you changing it? And B, you also mentioned that such restrictions keep India safe. I'm a bit confused which part of the country you're talking about, Kashmir, Assam or Mumbai?
Shashi Tharoor.
Well, I don't particularly remember saying that restrictions keep India safe. What I said was that unfortunately in a volatile society like ours, it is sometimes necessary to have reasonable restrictions in the interest of public order. And that applies to all of those, to Kashmir, to Assam, to Mumbai. And even then, as you've seen in all those places, there have been violence, there has been rioting, there has been stone throwing, there's even been killing. So in our society, we can't apply the rules that would apply to decorous living rooms in London or America. The fact is, ours is a society where extreme passions are often expressed, and the government reserves the right to have some restrictions. But let me point out...
But the rules haven't done much good, have they? I mean, they haven't exactly brought much stability to those regions, have they?
This is why the debating proposition is so absurd. There is no real threat to freedom of expression because the government is not capable of restricting or controlling the free expression of our Indians.
So why does it haul Google and Facebook into court, then?
Well, the fact is that they're still out there and functioning.
So it's having a good go, isn't it?
No, I think it's on very specific issues. And frankly, in our country, sadly, religious issues are always the ones that are the most sensitive, and those are the ones the government has been most
preoccupied. I want to go back to the
about.
questioner there. You don't look very impressed
But
with
sir,
what you've heard.
If the government is the one deciding what is freedom of speech, how is Indian government different from the British Raj? Even they were the ones who decided what you should say and what you not.
No, they don't decide what you should say. But look, the Constitution was adopted freely by elected representatives of our nation who decided to put these restrictions. Now, you and I may not like it. I personally would wish we had no restrictions whatsoever. But it's an acknowledgement of the kind of society and the kind of country we are. And we, as elected MPs in my case, have to uphold our Constitution. This is what our Constitution
promotes. Madhu Trehan.
I think what you've asked is a very important point. Shashi has constantly brought up that we are not living in the drawing rooms of the West. The fact of the matter is that this government is very quick in bringing out tear gas, water cannons, arresting people when it comes to people like Arvind Kejriwal. But however, when goons are coming to stop Salman Rushdie from coming to the Jaipur Literature Festival, they say we can't control it, stay away. So if it's a week, I would call not a banana, a mango republic, which is seasonally working. It works whenever it feels like.
When did Arvind Kejriwal face water cannons and tear gas?
Read the news last week. Okay, he was arrested, water cannons and tear gas. You don't say this in public because people will think you're not up to date.
And Salman Rushdie was stopped.
I think this is calling for laughing gas, not tear gas.
Please, don't talk about... Let Anil Dharkar say
Salman Rushdie was not stopped by the government.
No, can I finish?
He was stopped by Jaipur Festival itself.
He was
stopped by the Jaipur Festival itself.
I need to finish what I said. So let me answer the question. What I'm saying is, in response to Anil also, that the government chooses when to control which mob. It suited the government at that time because the UP elections were on. They did not want to appease the mob. They wanted to appease the mob, and therefore they said, we are incapable of controlling a mob. When they want to, they control the mob. When they don't, they don't.
Okay,
and,
all right.
And therefore, you're
that
absolutely correct, that the government controls the press, one, by doling out ads, withholding ads when it suits them.
Okay.
There are a huge amount of controls.
Anil Dharkar.
May I?
In a moment, please. Anil Dharkar.
What kind of press does the government control through its ads?
The daily newspapers?
Oh, come on.
It's
You
the
think
largest
the Hindu or the Times of India, the Hindustan Times are controlled by government ads? For God's sake, I mean, which world are you living in?
I'd ask you that.
You know, I have the experience of running a paper. I've never had a problem with the government. I was editing a paper when Ayodhya was happening. A lot of things were happening. There was a communal violence happening. There was never any pressure from any quarter. As it happens, not even from the newspaper owners, where it might come from. But
Tim, I really need to answer Ayodhya.
Yes,
You've had a go. I'm going to N.Ram.
Yeah,
Really.
as for governments, in my experience, there are two types of responses. When a government is voted to power with an overwhelming majority, then it acts in an arrogant fashion. When a government is in desperate trouble, as the Manmohan Singh government is, stock really hit the bottom, then it gets, in its own way, intolerant and snarls at anyone who's critical and wants to scapegoat the press or anybody who expresses his or her opinion in a vigorous way. And this is the law of government behavior in India that I have observed over the years, and I think I'm connecting with you on that point.
All right, gentleman in the front row.
My question is to Mr. Shashi Tharoor. Sir, while you were the Minister of External Affairs and you tweeted, and you're talking about India as a thriving democracy, because of your tweeting, you were pressurized and compelled to resign from the cabinet. Could you
Yeah, I'm
expand on
afraid
that, please?
ministers
Why?
have circumscribed freedom of expression. There's no question that now that I'm a free man, I'm a lot freer to say things. I mean, there are in any government, there are sort of, if you like, levels of tolerance that vary depending on who is. I mean, I could say things outside government that apparently are not so acceptable inside government, though in fact a lot of the things I was criticized for were not actually offensive. We can debate that separately, perhaps.
But your free speech was circumscribed.
Was very much
wasn't it?
circumscribed.
It's a very classical example that your speech was curbed. You being an Indian, how do you feel like if a cabinet minister is not allowed to tweet and you are...
No, I was allowed to tweet. The particular thing you're probably referring to is this.
You're speaking your mind. And if a cabinet minister of a ruling party had to face that fate, imagine us sitting in the audience.
No, but the point is those in the audience are freer than those in the cabinet. No, the point is that those in the audience are freer than those in the cabinet. But in this particular instance, I mean, I was joking about my freedom of speech. The truth is that I was certainly not prevented from tweeting, but there were some things I said that some chose to willfully misunderstand and create a controversy over.
Okay.
So that's a different matter.
N.Ram.
You have induced him to score what I may call an own goal.
Own goal.
Because that's what it is. But please read Salman Rushdie's the new novel, Joseph Anton, about these very issues, hard issues, where the right to offend, as he would put it. And I want to call attention to a tweet by Salil Tripathi, the journalist Salil Tripathi, I think, which puts it well. Biggest threat, combination of state passivity, antiquated laws, and existence of, quote, the right to feel offended. The right to feel offended has become a fundamental right in the views of these people, not the right to, more or less, balancing it against the...
Ram, I wrote a column for you in The Hindu
Yeah.
about 5 or 6 years ago saying exactly this, that one of the threats in our society is people claiming to be offended very easily.
I remember that very well.
Exactly.
It's not a threat unless people bow down in front of it, is it?
Precisely. And so we must stand up, and I believe the institutions of our state are still standing up for free expression for the most part. So there's no real question of an overall serious threat in India.
All right, lady in the third row.
Mr. Dharkar, you spoke about responsible restrictions. So, do you feel limiting text messages to 5 a day is responsible and fair to the people of the country?
No, it is not. I mean, there would be no argument about that. This
We're
was
talking about
done
what happened in Assam
specifically-
recently.
It was done specifically at one particular time for a particular purpose. That's all. It has never happened before. It hasn't happened since. It was only at a particularly volatile moment. And I think, as Shashi and I have been saying, that we have freedom of expression, which is absolute almost. But at some point, you have to exercise some restraint because of the nature of our society.
Don't you think this was a bit of excessive restraint? 5 messages a day, really?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
How many do you normally send? Madhu Trihan, you'd accept some limitations, wouldn't you, for a short period?
You see, if the government took positive steps in the social media and in fact went on Twitter themselves and gave the message out and said, do not listen to these tweets, do not obey these kind of messages, they should play an active role. You wouldn't have to do this censorship.
For once, I agree with Madhu Trihan. She's right.
Okay, well then we better move on
Then I better
quickly.
move on.
Yeah, lady in the second row there.
If the government did give out such messages, do you think we would listen to the government or the other people? Because anything which is against the government is what first attracts our attention.
Well said.
Who are you asking?
Your side, your side.
You'd like to answer that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think today I would admit that the government's credibility is really low. The journalism community also, our credibility is damaged. So it would be a competing force, and it would be your decision on who to follow. But even then, I don't think. I think the average citizen would still listen to a journalist's message that stay there, you will be safe. If the government says you will be safe, I ask you, would you believe them? Because they say we can't control goons when it suits them. Because they have to, somebody might be offended. This bowing down to people who are offended is so selective and only used to control the press.
Let's see what she said. You asked her a question, let her answer.
Yeah, I agree to that, but I agree to everything you say, but I think in this particular incident, the government was right in doing so, because they did it only for a particular period of time.
All right, N.Ram, where are you on this short-term measures to restrict text messages, things like that?
It's absurd. It's stupid to try to do this. And you just can't see why they're doing it, what they hope to achieve by this, except a reputation for stupidity, become a cartoon that goes viral on the World Wide Web, as they did on when they imprisoned this cartoonist for sedition and so on. And what kind of what sense does it make to do these things, to limit this? I can't see.
Doesn't it make the rumours even worse, Shashi Tharoor?
No, I think Madhu was
When
right.
people know that you're clamping down on sources of information, communication makes the rumours much worse.
Yes.
Well, no, the problem was that the medium of SMS was actually being used to spread panic, to intimidate, to threaten. That was the problem. So the government shut it down. I mean, I frankly agree it was rather silly, and that to blanket the entire country with this restriction meant that 99% of innocent people were affected as well. And it was a mistake, but it was done for a particular purpose at a particular time and lifted after that. In fact, within one day, it became 20 messages and not 5. But for one day, we suffered. Let me stress about this honesty, that we all appreciate, I think, the need to have free expression. But in our society, can you think of any other country where literally tens of thousands of people leapt onto trains and fled their homes to go away because they thought their lives were threatened? Yes, the government should have sent out messages saying, don't panic, we will be there. But the government didn't do that. Instead, it chose to try and cut off the threats at the source, and perhaps didn't do so well.
Okay, gentleman in the front row. You, sir. Yes.
My question is that when we talk about free speech, we're talking about opinion. So is it about just opinion? Is it about informed opinion? And when it comes to information coming in mainly from the media, especially media which is extremely corrupt in India, is it a performed opinion then?
Okay. All right, no, let's stay with that. Anil Darkar, shouldn't it be about more than opinions? It should be about the law, shouldn't it, free speech?
It should be about information. I think that what you need primarily from the media is information, which then allows you to make up your own minds. What I'm critical about of the media at the moment, especially television, is that it is all opinion. And you have television anchors skewing the debate in the way they want to. And I think that's wrong. Because I think the public must be allowed to make up its own mind by getting full information on a subject.
Madhu Trihan, you want to come in on that?
I don't think that was the question.
My question is that therefore, should there not be channels to be able to stop these particular measures which kind of try and bias your opinion?
Okay, I got it. That is presuming that the Indian population are either little children or fools, all right? This is exactly what the press council chairman, Markande, said. And not only said, he wrote in an article that 90% of Indians are fools. That means that you're not trusting the Indian public to judge for themselves. We are not fools. Any good citizen, any person can judge, this is biased to this direction, this is biased in this direction. Leave it to the people to judge. People are not idiots.
The press is the central place wherein we seek information from.
Yeah.
And we seek clear information from you. Not information which is possibly paid for or possibly somewhere biased to a certain party. We want clear information.
Yes.
You guys invade us. We cannot go around visiting.
We got the point.
As somebody who edited a daily newspaper, I agree. I always believed in maintaining lines between reporting. Don't editorialize in the guise of news. But equally important is analysis and comment, which the media provide. And in any country in the world, any significant country which has serious media, the mainstream media would be expected to have the predominant influence. But these days, it's mediated by the others coming in, citizen journalism, the social media, and so on.
Okay.
But in India, you're deprived of it. In India, you don't have enough of it.
Shashi Tharoor.
I agree entirely with the question that instead of informed opinion, very often, particularly on our television screens, we get what he calls
You want more
informed
controls.
opinion.
He's calling for more controls.
I
He's
want better
asking-
journalism, Tim. I want journalists to understand that there ought to be a
Well, a lot of
distinction
people want better
between-
politicians.
Oh,
You get what you get,
I want better
don't you?
politicians too. But as far as I need to see that the distinction that is taught, I believe, in the first course in journalism school between reporting, commentary, analysis, opinion, and speculation, those distinctions are actually observed. They are not for the most part. We have frauds declaiming the nation wants to know in order to steer the conversation towards a particular bias or a particular prejudice. Our media is grossly irresponsible, and our public is ill-served by journalists, particularly television journalists, who do not give them the informed opinion that enables them to actually make the right judgment. Madhu speaks about respecting the public. How can you respect the public if you insult them with falsehood?
We're giving
If you've
our
come to that
audience some informed
conclusion,
opinion
so
tonight.
can the public. If you have come to an informed conclusion that this press is slanted or this person is leading it, so can the public. What makes you think you're superior to the rest of the people?
Because he's in the cabinet.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the point in the proceedings. We're going to vote on the motion that freedom of speech is under serious threat in India. Would you please take your voting machines? If you want to vote for that motion, that is the side represented by those on my right, you're going to need in a moment to press button 1. If you want to vote against the motion, the side represented by those on my left, it's button 2. Whichever button you want to press, please do so now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the results are in. The audience has spoken. 81% of you said free speech is under serious threat in India. 19% said it isn't. So the motion has been resoundingly carried. Let's just look at the way you voted before. The figures at the beginning of the debate were 79% thought free speech was under serious threat. 21% thought it wasn't. So there's been a 2% swing towards those who are for the motion. Shashi Tharoor, they didn't buy your arguments somehow.
Well, we've been talking about a misinformed public opinion. I'm sorry, we saw another bit of evidence of it.
All right, Anil Dhaka.
Just joking, don't worry.
I absolutely second that. And
We'll have you protected on the way out. Madhu Trehan.
Poor losers, I must say. Fact of the matter is, I am delighted that we have a percentage which disproves Katju's claim that 90% of Indians are fools. I'm glad you're clued in, and we have to make our voices heard.
N.Ram.
I'm not disappointed that the swing factor was so small, because relating to your proposition, you don't really need the influence of representatives from what I'd call the mainstream media. You have it yourselves on gut issues like this. You know what it's out there.
All right. All I have to do now is thank our panelists for coming tonight. Thank you very much indeed for being here. Thanks to you, the audience here in Mumbai and around the world. Please keep in touch with us via our website, www.theoutsider.tv. We're always glad to know you're there. Till the next time, from all of us on the program, good night.